By noon, Karen's phone had rung 37 times. She'd stopped answering after the 15th call, all of them from neighbors who'd somehow already heard about the incident. Now she sat in her pristine home office, surrounded by 27 years of perfectly organized HOA files, staring at the framed Volunteer of the Year award she'd received every year since 1998. The doorbell rang. Through her window, she could see Channel 7's news van parked across the street. Mrs. Millfield. The reporter was young, blonde, and holding a microphone like a weapon. I'm Jessica Martinez from Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you about this morning's incident involving alleged property destruction by the HOA. Alleged? Karen's voice cracked. There was no alleged about it. The property was in clear violation of community standards, and I took appropriate action under the emergency maintenance provision of our governing documents. The camera was rolling. Karen could see her reflection in the lens, her usually immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain. Her polo shirt had water stains, and her hair had escaped its regulation bobby pins. So you admit to using a pressure washer that ultimately destroyed your neighbor's swimming pool. I admit to performing routine maintenance that revealed serious structural deficiencies in improperly constructed pool infrastructure. The words came automatically, honed by years of board meetings and violation hearings, but they sounded hollow even to her own ears. The Hendersons claimed damages of over $20,000. They're also alleging trespassing and harassment. How do you respond? Karen's chest tightened. $20,000. The HOA's insurance deductible was $5,000, and she'd have to explain to the board why she'd authorized emergency maintenance without their approval. For the first time in her tenure, she'd acted unilaterally. The Hendersons had been repeatedly warned about the unsightly condition of their pool area. As a board member, I have both the authority and the responsibility to maintain our community's standards. But even as she said it, Karen could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Had the algae really been that bad? She'd been making her rounds that morning, clipboard in hand, when she'd noticed the green tinge along the pool's edge. It had looked unprofessional, embarrassing. The kind of thing that could impact property values if left unchecked. After the reporter left, Karen retreated to her office and pulled out the HOA's governing documents. She'd memorized every section, every subsection, every amendment voted on over the decades. But now, reading through the emergency maintenance provision, the language seemed less clear than she'd remembered. Her phone buzzed with a text from HOA President Gerald Hoffman. Emergency board meeting tonight, 7 p.m. We need to talk. Karen had served under 3 different HOA presidents, outlasting them all through her unwavering dedication to the rules. But Gerald was different. He'd been pushing for modernization of their enforcement policies, suggesting they were too rigid, too aggressive. He'd questioned her methods before. She opened her laptop and began drafting her incident report, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she documented every detail of the morning's events. The algae growth, the ignored warnings, the clear violation of Section 4.21, the reasonable action taken under emergency protocols. But with each word she typed, the certainty that had driven her for 27 years felt increasingly fragile. Karen Millfield stood in her sensible beige capris and HOA-issued polo shirt, watching the horrifying spiderweb of cracks spread across the Hendersons' pool wall like lightning frozen in concrete. The pressure washer in her white-knuckled grip was still humming, water dripping from its nozzle like evidence at a crime scene. "Oh my God, Karen, what did you do?" shrieked Linda Henderson, bursting through her back gate in her bathrobe, cell phone already recording. "You just destroyed our pool." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. 27 years as Willowbrook Estates' most dedicated HOA board member, and she'd never faced anything like this. The pressure washer had seemed like such a reasonable solution to the Hendersons' unsightly algae problem that had been flagged in her weekly property inspection report. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all exterior surfaces must be maintained in pristine condition. Karen managed, her voice pitched higher than usual. Section 4.21 specifically addresses pool maintenance standards. You broke into our backyard with a pressure washer at 7 in the morning. Linda's husband Dave appeared beside her, his face red with fury. This is trespassing. This is destruction of property. Karen's perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she set down the pressure washer. She used her master key, standard protocol for emergency maintenance issues. The all day had been reported by 3 different neighbors, and the Hendersons had ignored 2 written warnings. She was just doing her job, following procedure, maintaining property values. The emergency maintenance clause grants the HOA authority to what? Destroy a $15,000 pool? Dave pulled out his own phone. I'm calling the police. The familiar thrill of authority that usually accompanied Karen's enforcement duties was rapidly morphing into something cold and uncomfortable in her stomach. She'd been pressure washing for 40 minutes, working methodically across the pool's surface, when the first crack appeared, then another. Then a sound like breaking glass as the entire wall gave way. Now that's all calmed down, Karen said, straightening her shoulders and summoning her most official tone. I'm sure the HOA's insurance will cover any necessary repairs. This was clearly a case of improper pool construction that couldn't withstand basic maintenance procedures. Linda's jaw dropped. Are you seriously blaming us for this? I'm simply following protocol, Karen replied, though her voice wavered. Behind the Hendersons, she could see curtains twitching in windows throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen was openly filming from her kitchen window. The Johnson twins were climbing their fence for a better view. Karen had never backed down from an HOA enforcement action, not once in 27 years. Her reputation as Willowbrook's most thorough board member had been built on unwavering consistency and attention to detail. But standing there, watching several thousand gallons of chlorinated water flood the Hendersons' meticulously landscaped backyard, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her first day on the board: uncertainty. You'll be hearing from our lawyer, Dave said, his voice deadly quiet. Karen clutched her clipboard tighter and walked toward the gate with as much dignity as she could muster, her sensible shoes squelching in the growing puddle of pool water. The community center had never felt so hostile. Karen arrived at 6:55 p.m., 5 minutes early as always, to find the parking lot packed with cars she recognized from her daily patrols. The Hendersons' damaged pool had apparently galvanized the entire neighborhood. Inside, every seat was occupied. Residents who'd never attended a board meeting in their lives sat in folding chairs that had been hastily arranged to accommodate the crowd. Karen took her usual seat at the board table, but the familiar sense of authority felt different now, more like being in a defendant's chair. Gerald Hoffman called the meeting to order, his expression grave. Before we begin tonight's regular business, we need to address this morning's incident involving board member Karen Millfield. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen straightened her shoulders and stood up, clutching her prepared statement. I'd like to read my formal incident report into the record, she began, but Dave Henderson's voice cut through hers. Incident report: you destroyed our pool with a pressure washer. You broke into our backyard at 7 in the morning like some kind of vigilante. I used proper HOA access procedures under emergency maintenance provisions. Karen replied, her voice steady despite the hostile crowd. Your property was in clear violation of. What emergency? Linda Henderson stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Green algae isn't an emergency. It's not a health hazard or a safety issue. You just decided you didn't like how our pool looked. Karen felt heat rising in her cheeks. Community standards exist for a reason. Property values depend on consistent enforcement of our governing documents. Whose property values? Mrs. Chen called out from the back of the room. You've been harassing all of us for years. My garden gnomes, the Johnsons' wind chimes, the Patel's holiday decorations that were supposedly too colorful. More voices joined in, a chorus of complaints that Karen had catalogued and documented over the years. Each violation notice, each enforcement action, each fine had been justified under the HOA's rules. She'd been protecting their community, maintaining standards, preserving their investment. I've done everything by the book, Karen said, her voice rising above the crowd. Every action I've taken has been in accordance with our governing documents, which you all agreed to when you bought your homes. The book is wrong if it leads to this, said Tom Patel, gesturing toward a photo of the Hendersons' destroyed pool wall. "We're not living in a dictatorship, Karen. We're neighbors." Gerald cleared his throat. "The board has reviewed the incident, and we've determined that the emergency maintenance provision does not apply to aesthetic issues. The action taken this morning exceeded the authority granted to individual board members." Karen felt the room spinning slightly. "I've been enforcing these rules for 27 years. The board has always supported my actions." "The board has also received legal counsel," Gerald continued. "Our insurance company is advising that individual board members who act outside their authority may not be covered for damages or liability." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. 27 years of perfect service, and now they were abandoning her over one incident. One mistake. One moment when she tried to do what she'd always done: maintain standards, protect property values, enforce the rules that kept their community civilized. "I move for a vote of no confidence in board member Millfield," Dave Henderson called out. "Seconded," came a voice from the crowd. Karen looked around the room at faces she'd known for decades. People whose violations she'd documented, whose compliance she'd monitored, whose property values she'd protected. Now they stared back at her with something between anger and pity. The vote was 47-3. 3 weeks later, Karen sat in her real estate agent's office, signing the papers to list her Willowbrook Estates home. The legal bills were mounting, and the Hendersons' lawsuit had frozen her assets pending settlement. The HOA's insurance company had denied coverage, citing her unauthorized actions, and her personal liability coverage was insufficient for the damages. "The market's still strong," her agent said diplomatically, "though I should mention that some buyers might be put off by the recent publicity." Karen nodded silently. The Channel 7 story had gone viral on social media, spawning dozens of HOA Karen memes and making her the unwitting poster child for overzealous neighborhood governance. Her perfectly maintained home, the showcase property she pointed to for years as an example of proper compliance, now felt like a museum to her former life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. "Board voted to revise enforcement policies. New procedures require unanimous approval for any action involving property access. Thought you should know." 27 years of service, rendered obsolete by a single morning's work. Karen had built her entire identity around being Willowbrook's guardian, the one person willing to make the hard decisions that kept their community pristine. Now the very rules she'd enforced so faithfully had become her undoing. She drove through the neighborhood one last time, noting violations that would have sent her rushing for her clipboard just a month ago. The Morrisons' fence needed repainting. The Lee's trash cans were still visible from the street after collection day. The new family on Maple Street had planted flowers in colors that clearly violated the approved palette. But instead of indignation, Karen felt something unexpected, a strange sense of relief. The constant vigilance that had defined her for so long was exhausting in ways she'd never acknowledged. Always watching, always documenting, always ready to defend rules that seemed increasingly arbitrary when measured against human cost. At the Hendersons' house, she slowed down. The pool had been drained and was being demolished, replaced by a garden that would likely be beautiful but definitely non-compliant with the HOA's landscaping guidelines. Through the kitchen window, she could see Linda Henderson laughing with someone on the phone, looking lighter than Karen had seen her in years. Karen's new apartment was in a complex with no HOA, no governing documents, no enforcement provisions. Just neighbors who nodded at each other in the hallway and lived their lives without committees or compliance reviews. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Her final act as an HOA board member had been to request a copy of all governing documents for her personal files. But instead of the comfort she'd expected from their familiar language, she found herself questioning every rule, every restriction, every carefully crafted provision that had governed her life for so long. As she pulled into her driveway for the last time, Karen noticed something that made her smile despite everything. Mrs. Chen had placed a new garden gnome by her mailbox, a defiant little figure giving a thumbs up to the world. Karen made a mental note to write a violation notice, then laughed at herself and crumpled up the imaginary citation. Some rules, She was beginning to understand what was the cost of perfect compliance. But as she unlocked her door, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in Willowbrook Estates, another violation was happening at that very moment. And for the first time in 27 years, there was no one watching.